Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the penultimate speaker session of HCon X Ka-Ching. This session will be on freedom of movement. I am Aman Zaveri, and I'll be your host and moderator for the day. This session will attempt to decipher the forces that continue to influence and restrict free movement of people across and within borders as a prerequisite to globalization, free markets, and at times survival in war-torn regions. On the panel today, we have two eminent speakers who will share their valuable insights on freedom of movement. Our first esteemed speaker for the day is Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty. Shetty sir is the founder and chairman of Allcargo Logistics, part of Avvashya. In 2020, the government of India's Ministry of Education appointed Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty as the chairman of the society and board of governors of the National Institute of Industrial Engineering, NITIE, one of India's premier management engineering institutes. He has also been an active participant in initiatives of the World Economic Forum and those important Indian industry associations like the Confederation of the Indian Industry, CII, and the Associated Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Shetty is also a philanthropist at heart. As our second esteemed panelist, we have Dr. Atreyee Majumder. Dr. Majumdar is a political anthropologist, and her research is geared primarily towards interrogating how capital and the modern sovereign align, and how this nexus expresses itself in space. She has consistently published scholarly articles and has written in popular venues on these issues. She also conducts workshops on ethnographic methods for activists and members of the general public. One of these workshops was with the slum youth of Mumbai in order to equip them to conduct research in their neighborhood. It is an honor to have the two of you among us today, sir and ma'am. Before we start the session, I would like to inform the audience that we would be answering audience questions at the end of the session. So please send in all your questions on Zoom personal chat to Archisha Malhotra. Without further ado, let's get right to the session. To begin with, Mr. Shetty, Dr. Majumdar, how are you all doing?
Doing well, thank
Mr.
you.
Shetty?
Doing very well. Thank you very much, Aman.
Right.
Good
So
evening.
Good
evening to all your participants and organizers.
Right.
Hi, everyone.
A very
happy
good
to be
evening to
here.
you. Thank you. Right. So to begin with, I'd like to ask the two of you how you chose this particular career path. Were you always inclined towards this career path, or was there a sudden spark? What was the turning point that led you all to choose this particular path? So, Mr. Shetty, would you like to go first?
When you say this particular path in terms of?
In terms of entering the logistics industry.
Okay, all right. Yeah, in my case, I came looking for a job in Bombay when I was 21, and I didn't know which job to take, and I ended up in a shipping industry, and that's how I started my career. After working for 4 years, I decided to start a logistics company on my own at the age of 25. So today we've been able to build a unicorn after 25 years, of course, or 20 years roughly. That's where we are. We are today India's largest logistics company with offices in over 180 countries around the world. And we've grown the business through multiple acquisitions in different global markets, beginning in Belgium, then in China, then in the United States, and in multiple other acquisitions around the world, and integrated them and created a network of offices called EQ Worldwide, which is 100% subsidiary of Allcargo Logistics Limited. And in Allcargo, we also do what you call as container freight stations management, which is outside the port bonded area, where we store containers and transport containers to the respective premises of the importers, and also do consolidation of export cargo from our CFSs to be shipped around the world. We operate from all the ports in the country. And we also do warehousing development, construction, and also management of the warehouses. Currently, we operate about 15 million square feet around the country. working for various manufacturing companies of all types, right? Automobile, chemical, pharmaceuticals, fashion, retail, e-commerce. And we serve all the large customers in the country. And we at one time also used to own ships, but we decided to move out of ship owning business. So our business is, end-to-end transportation by sea, by road, by rail, and by air. And also we do the intermediary requirements in terms of warehousing management, distribution, and storage, etc. And as a company, we today employ over 12,000 people. Out of that, about 4,000 of them are outside India and 8,000 people in our country. And, I think it's been a fascinating journey and a fascinating experience. We also been very successful in raising capital from private equity, public market, QIPs, etc. The company is, highly regarded for its corporate governance, and the company delivered 15% CAGR growth in the last 20 years without fail. And it's a very profitable, very successful company with a very high culture of governance and growth. I'm trying to also influence the only institution where I am the chairman in an education institution, which is very close to my heart. That's the reason I accepted this invitation from all of you who approached me to give my time and my wisdom to share with the as many as possible, so that I can inspire some of you to follow the path of courage, principles, and integrity in building your own life and your career. And if you're able to apply that along with hard work, of course, then you will be able to build a very successful life, and that's most important. And also a very successful profession or business, right? And why I'm saying profession is you can make a profession to serve the nation as well, right? In your individual capacity by doing, either joining political parties where you need very highly educated, smart people if your country has to progress. Or you can join even social organizations or educational institutions. Everybody doesn't have to be in business, because I don't think everybody is gifted to do business. There are people who are gifted in a different way. And, it is very important that you use the gift, the God's gift, to what makes you most effective and what makes you most happy, right? One of you could be a sports person, or somebody could be a great singer, or whatever that makes you excited, makes you passionate and happy. That's the path I think you all should choose. So that's the reason that I'm here today. And like I said, I wanted to make an impact in the National Institute of Industrial Engineering, although I'm myself not an engineer. I'm bringing my leadership and my wisdom to develop that institution to another level. So that's the reason I accepted that position. And it came to me on my lap. I didn't know. I was very surprised to learn that I was been nominated by the government of India's Ministry of Education. So obviously they went because of my credentials as a successful and reputed business house. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I don't know whether I deviated if I gave a long reply to your short question.
No, sir, absolutely not, sir. That was a very inspiring answer. And thank you for being with us today. Dr. Majumdar, if you could tell us how you were guided towards this industry, about your interest in anthropology, etc.
I was a lawyer and I graduated from the National Law School. I haven't had as illustrious and long a career as Mr. Shetty has, but let me just briefly say that I came to Delhi as a young lawyer in 0607 to litigate, and somehow I got into legal research, public interest legal research. And that took me a way around Delhi and UP, and I traveled a bit with social movements and NGOs and various activists and things like that. People who are doing a range of work around issues of land, issues of pollution, issues of environment, and so on and so forth. So I got interested in all of that, and I decided that anthropology would be the best place for best discipline for me to go to in order to pursue higher studies, because I wanted to do what anthropologists call ethnography, which is a certain kind of qualitative research that they do on the ground with people, right? It's not research based on numbers. It's not research based on just kind of being in a laboratory or a library. It's research on the ground, and I wanted to do that, and that's what took me away from law towards anthropology. And I haven't regretted it. I'll just stop here by now and ask participants who are young, like I once was, to consider that life throws things at you which you don't always make sense of, but if something excites you, do follow it. And I haven't regretted following anthropology ever since. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. That was excellent, and we are honored to have you here on the panel. So now that we've got to know the two of you all better, I will dive right into our questions. So I begin with Dr. Majumdar. Dr. Majumdar, you have conducted numerous workshops for the general public as well as activists to educate them about ethnographic methods, as you just mentioned. My question is regarding the slum youth of Mumbai. Do you believe that freedom of movement from rural to urban areas is increasing pressure on the urban service sector and infrastructure in Mumbai in particular and India at large?
You mean rural to urban movement in Mumbai particularly is putting pressure on the service sector?
Right, either in Mumbai in general or the entire country at large.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely putting pressure on various sectors, not only the service sector, but I think it's natural. It has to happen, because if you see the amount of agrarian distress that is there in rural areas all over the country, especially where in areas like, say, some parts of Maharashtra where there are farmer suicides, some parts of Madhya Pradesh, some parts of other parts of India where there is not enough water, or the land is not fertile, or the land is degrading. Now large numbers of farming populations, they are not finding it easy to remain farmers anymore. Why? So the question is not just the pull factor or the push factor of migration, right? Migration has a pull factor and a push factor, right? It pushes people out of the agrarian communities and agrarian countryside, and pull factor that the city pulls people with various kinds of attractions and job offers or job promises of jobs and things like that from the countryside into the city, right? So that's the pull factor and the push factor. But that's not enough. We should see, why is it that large numbers of people are finding it expedient to move out of the countryside into the city? And I would say that at some point in the economy of every country, if every developing country at least, there comes a time where the farming profession is in great jeopardy. And that is the secret of migration patterns in India today, that the farming profession is in great jeopardy. There's great farming distress in large parts of the country, and large numbers of members of the farming population are finding it easy or advisable to just give up farming, at least, or put farming at bay for the time being, and go to the city and say, drive an auto, or become a security guard, or these kinds of things. These are not particularly well-paid jobs, so it's not that the standards of life that they're affording in the city coming from the countryside is particularly much better. But it's because of the pressures in the countryside, economic and social pressures in the countryside, that people are finding it expedient to move out into the city. Of course, it puts pressure on various sectors, but the city is a fungible entity. It is not a bounded entity. It's not a complete, like a fortress. The city is not. A city can absorb much more than we think it can absorb. It's certainly a city like Mumbai, even a city like Bangalore, where I am at currently, they can absorb a lot more than when we can even imagine, that numbers can tell us. And so even if the sectors are a little bit pressurized, I think it's important that we accept these people in our cities, because they have nowhere else to go. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think that was a really insightful answer into how we need to accept them and the bifurcation between the push factor and the pull factor. I'll now move on to Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty. So you had recently published an article in the Entrepreneur on digitization and its effects on the logistics sector. So my question to you, sir, is do you think that the pandemic has pushed us forward or backwards in terms of digitizing? And how should the logistics sector in specific and the country in general move ahead with this digitization?
Yeah, no, I think after what Dr. Majumdar said, a couple of points that I wanted to also make to add to what she said is that I think
Right, sir.
agriculture is also becoming less paying and lot hard work. And I think also in agriculture, the farmer also depends a lot on the middlemen. And it leads to a lot of wastage of the produce. So, and obviously nowadays, also with what farmers see for their own children, they want them to do better with access to television, with access to the world view. They also want to improve their children's or grandchildren's life, right? So obviously they also encourage migration from villages to the cities. And cities, like she said, also absorbs people, and cities also expand. Bangalore doesn't mean you're in the middle of Bangalore. You're in the 50 or 100 kilometers around Bangalore or Bombay, right? The city keep on expanding and absorbing more and more people. The other factor also, I think the opportunity in the villages are also limited. Not many industries. India hasn't done well in manufacturing to the potential what India has for various reasons, because of our infrastructural reason or a policy deficiencies or power shortages, ease of doing business or cost of manufacturing, skill development, whatever. There are hundreds of reasons why manufacturing has not really done as much as India has the potential to do, right? So that also pushes people from villages to the towns and the cities, and even abroad. A lot of Indians want to go abroad also. That is a very important thing. You see Indians everywhere. Any part of the world you go, you find Indians and do well also. And by large, Indians are very hardworking and smart people, right? Right. So that's one part. The other part is, I think, your question, what you asked related to digitization in the logistic industry. Pandemic has definitely helped the industry to digitize a lot more, and it has also brought in a focus. And at a board level, these conversations have become more and more to invest in technology, invest in improving the processes, invest in data analytics to find out the ways in which the companies can perform more efficiently, and how we can use the data for growing your business or looking at adjacencies. What are the other opportunities that the data offer you to your enterprise? So the minds have opened. The pockets have become larger. The budget allocation for technology and digitization has increased substantially. And people realized also that the way e-commerce is growing, both B2C, B2B, and B2C2B, all are going all around us. And it is a utopia that if you don't do anything about it, thinking that it will not come and disrupt your business. People have realized, particularly the middlemen, who have realized that if they don't adopt digitization, if they don't create a product and services which combines multiple services, so that there is a one-stop shop for a customer to come to and get all the services that they need. In our business, for example, it is transportation, warehousing, air freight, a container freight station, international transportation, domestic distribution. So the industry is moving in that direction, that consolidation of services and products under one company. Second is scaling the business to a market leadership. So consolidation is happening on one hand of the companies, And the other hand, consolidation of various products coming under one company is also happening around the world. So if you look at any of the large global conglomerates, you take DHL, you take FedEx or UPS, these are some of the big names internationally. They offer all sorts of services on an end-to-end basis in a global way, and they are market leaders, right? So the billions of dollars of worth capitalized companies. So I think that's the future also for India, and that's the market is moving in that direction. If you look at the liner shipping industry, when I say liner shipping industry, you must have heard the name companies like Maersk Line, company like CMA CGM, Mediterranean Shipping Lines, Hapag-Lloyd. There are about about 5 years ago, there used to be at least about 25 companies of different sizes and scales. Today, within the last 5 years, these 25 companies have become only 10 companies through consolidation, right? Because the companies realize that without a scale, it will be very hard for them to make profit. So there is a huge consolidation happening in the market. And after the consolidation and with post-COVID, the markets have dramatically changed. This year, these 20 companies or 10 companies going to post a profit of $200 billion. And which was 2 years ago, it was not even $20 billion combined. This year, they would make $200 billion of profit. So which means consolidation has brought tremendous amount of value because the ocean freight went up, the cost came down. There's a great return on capital these days. These companies are now becoming product consolidators. Like I said earlier, they're not only giving liner shipping services, they're also giving services end-to-end, land side services and ocean services, and they're also getting into air freight services. This is where the industry is moving. And with this scale, they're investing hugely on digital strategy, building microservices platforms, online booking platforms, data analytics, and automation, using AI in their business. So markets have dramatically changed through technology post-COVID. Just started pre-COVID, but post-COVID, it accelerated.
Right. Got it, sir. Got it. That was an extremely insightful answer. Thank you very much for that. My next question will be to Dr. Majumdar. Moving back to the COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic, of course, had a great impact on our country and the world. But I would like to talk about a section of society that may or may not have been ignored, the migrant laborers. So my question to Dr. Majumdar is whether a pandemic should be reason enough to restrict cross-border interstate movements of the migrants in a country where more than 1/3 of the population falls in the above category. And if yes, why so?
I'm on mute. That's a tough one. With some consideration, let me say yes. And I'm saying this yes with some consideration, with some reservations, because I generally don't think that a migrant population should be stopped out the borders anywhere, the international borders or internal borders or whatever. I'm all for free movement of our populations, especially for desperate populations who need to move somewhere else for their own safety and security. But a pandemic is an exceptional situation. A pandemic is not a normal situation. Am I right? So you have to look at a pandemic where the Disaster Management Act is in play, right? Like the state has exceptional powers. The state, and by state I mean the government, gets exceptional powers under the Disaster Management Act when it is put into operation during a pandemic or during any other kind of disaster, right? So under the Disaster Management Act, if you follow the law of the country, the various kinds of exceptional powers can be used by the government to say, as long as the pandemic is going on, I will restrict your freedoms in this and that way. And as much as a lockdown or whatever may not be economically the most expedient, because people lose jobs, people lose business, and that's not the most expedient. I understand that, but at times it may be necessary to have something like this, to restrict movement across state borders, or to restrict, to have vaccine checks as people are moving from one place to another. As we saw during the first lockdown of 2020, there was massive amount of suffering that migrant labor had to suffer, who were literally walking from Delhi to Bihar and UP, and that situation should not repeat. It should not repeat. So I'm not saying that their restriction of their freedom to move was necessarily the most clever thing, but I do think that during a pandemic, certain restrictions have to be in place. You cannot assume that a pandemic is a time where regular freedoms will be in place, and it makes us also think about the nature of our freedoms, right? Like you can't take a freedom as an absolute. No freedom is an absolute. You have to take it as with some salt and pepper, to think that there might be situations which are so disastrous, or which are so kind of dangerous or important, that your freedoms may have to be restricted during those times. So I think the government having those powers to restrict movement during a pandemic is right. Whether the government should, and how the government should restrict those movements, freedom of movement, using these powers, is dependent on how the government chooses to use its discretion. In the use of discretion, often the government is not right. Sometimes the government is not right. Like in the March 2020 migrant labor, movement of migrant labor from Delhi onwards into Bihar and UP, and that kind of restriction was perhaps not the best way to deal with the situation. But the government having the powers to do so, I support it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Majumdar, for that answer. Thank you very much. Mr. Shetty, before I move on to your next question, is there something that you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I think, it is a very common common statements made in the business world, is that never waste a crisis. Okay, never waste a crisis. What happens during crisis is it brings everybody together. There is a unified fight. Psychologically, everybody comes together. It is much easier for convincing people and get people together for a certain cause, right? In organizations, during the crisis, it is the best time to make the organization more efficient, more cost conscious, and get the people to really focus on the strategy and implementation. So if any company who's able to use that crisis to their advantage, they say that you don't waste a crisis, and crisis doesn't come again and again. And, we have experienced such crisis in our organization few times already, the global financial crisis, and then there were the COVID crisis. We've been able to really been very resilient to the crisis. Instead of taking a step back, we made some very, very bold decisions and worked on transforming the company, including working from home, which was a massive challenge for a service industry like ours, and which is globally spread in different time zones. And we have very, very strong deadlines. When the ships come, you got to have all the paperwork completed in the customs. Otherwise, there will be huge penalties at the destination for the containers which are lying in the ports. So it was a massive challenge. And also every country, particularly in the Western world, you had port congestions because their infrastructure for some reason were lacking due to continuous disruption on the port operations. Like Dr. Majumdar said, there is a urban migration, which we all saw, of course. And even in the Western world, there has been a lot of migration that happened from the ports to the hinterland of the truck drivers and workers and labor, etc. So there was a tremendous shortage of labor in the ports, and that delayed the discharge of ships. That led to ships getting delayed in the ports, and containers not getting evacuated to the factories because there is no driver to transport the containers to the factories. And there's no warehouse space. You can imagine in the Western world, there are no warehousing space available because everything is consumed. Cargo is not moving out. Cargo is only getting accumulated in the warehouses. And there is so much only you can store in the warehouse. So there's an entire disruption of the supply chain happened, and the ships got delayed outside the ports. That created artificial shortage of supply of the shipping space. And that put pressure on the ocean freight. And the ocean freight went 5 times, 10 times. And not only that, the whole supply chain got delayed because the cargo was not moving and the cargo was shipping inside the ships. So that disrupted the entire movement of shipments around the world and created shortage of merchandise in the shops. That's why you find there is no free supply of cars, because there is no semiconductors that have been provided to the automobile manufacturing companies because of the disruption in the supply chain. So like that, there are multiple industries got badly affected because of that, and prices went up. Commodity prices went up significantly, as all of you know, and that is now leading to inflation. So the world is now facing almost 5 or 6% inflation around the world on an average. Some countries it is more, some countries it is less. In the Western world, it is about 5%. So there's quite a bit of disruptions that have happened because of the COVID crisis.
Right, sir. Thank you. Thank you for those valuable insights on supply chain disruption, especially in the semiconductor market. That is something I think we've all read about.
Yes.
Moving on to the next question, sir, which is directed to you, and it is a long one. So the Ever Given crisis, which resulted in the blockage of the Suez Canal, was a major hindrance in global trade. The Suez Canal accounts for roughly 12% of global trade, 30% of global container traffic, and there are roughly flows of over $1 trillion worth of goods per annum. When the Suez Canal shut down, companies were forced to choose between waiting and riding out the uncertainty of this blockage or rerouting vessels around Africa. The longer shipping paths then added to the costs, which included the resourcing and the fuel bills, and the risk of time-sensitive freight being delayed or spoiled. The Egyptian authorities have pinned the blame on a possible human error. Now coming to my question, sir. Should this have been a turning point in terms of increased mechanization in the global maritime trade?
The Suez Canal crisis has less impact on putting pressure on mechanized handling, because mechanized handling is already happening. The container handling in the most efficient ports in the country is almost 60-65 containers per hour is the output per crane. Okay, that's already a very remarkable output. The ships come and turn around in 24-48 hours. So there is no issue about productivity of container handling or bulk cargo handling in the ports because they're already mechanized. Okay, so what happened in the case of Suez Canal? It is one of the freak accidents that has happened. The problem what was there is the weather conditions were so bad, and the whole salvaging effort became very mammoth. And the ship size was also quite a big ship, and the way the whole accident happened is blocked the whole canal completely, right? So these kind of accidents do happen in Suez Canal. And keeping all this in mind, Suez Canal is already been thinking about building one more canal or increasing the width of that canal. So that's an isolated incident. But in what also caused is obviously the whole infrastructure in the Suez Canal, I think will get fast-tracked, keeping in mind the disruption that happened to the global supply chain. Also, what would happen in the future is, which is already a development that was taking place where the companies were looking at near-shoring their manufacturing. Instead of buying everything from Asia to all the way to the, say, for example, the American markets, North and Southern American markets, which are quite a long distance. A lot of things can change. So there is already a lot of discussion because of the nearshoring discussions were happening in Europe or in the United States, in Canada. They were setting up bases of manufacturing, say, for example, for the Northern America in Mexico, or for the Western world, it is in the Eastern European countries. So some manufacturers are already moving in those areas. And also because of the trade patterns, there are a lot of preferential trade agreements that is being signed between different countries, multiple concessional tariffs that is being given to certain countries. So the entire supply chain was getting rearranged in any way. So because of COVID, that process is also now getting accelerated. So with that, one of the greatest opportunity India has is to set India ready for a China +1 strategy. So that is where the Atmanirbhar Bharat or the entire Gati Shakti program, or giving the incentive schemes for Indian manufacturing companies for certain products, which has been announced by the government of India, and that is likely to get passed on to more industries and more products that India can manufacture. Because in the manufacturing business, scale is very, very important. The cost per unit has to be comparable to the established manufacturing countries like China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, etc. So India has to be competitive. If you know, must have read, you remember, India also announced one of the lowest taxation, income tax for corporations, 17%. For the new companies, the corporate tax now is only 17%, coming from something like 40% in the past to 17% is a huge decision, right? So there is a lot of effort put by the government, ease of doing business, giving incentive to manufacturing in the country, giving land approvals and single window approvals. There are a lot of support that is coming for the manufacturing. And this is one of the greatest opportunity India has to increase its manufacturing. And all of you also know that manufacturing creates maximum amount of jobs for rural India, for the labor and for skilled labor, etc., engineers and all that. So India need to grow into manufacturing, and I think the government is very aware of this subject and this matter, and a lot of effort that is being put. And India, if you look at this year, India has grown 37% in its export in the month of December. So there is a significant improvement that is happening in that area.
Oh, wow. That's great to hear, sir. Especially the 37% jump. I think it will make us all proud.
Yeah.
So thank you, sir, for those valuable insights. Dr. Majumdar, before I move on to your question, is there something that you'd like to add on this? I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, not much. Thank you.
All right. I'll move on to the next question. Dr. Majumdar, Canada has a system called Private Sponsorship of Refugees Program, wherein groups of 5 organizations and sponsorship agreement holders can sign agreements with the government to support refugees when they come to Canada. In a poll conducted by CBC, 57% of the total participating adults did not want any new refugees. And with the Human Rights Watch warning Canada about their treatment of the indigenous population, is it in the best interest of the country to continue this program as a moral responsibility because it is in the higher income spectrum and take more refugees? Or should they focus on uplifting their own communities? And will the same be applicable to other high income countries like Canada?
I would say this, I actually saw, this question is so serendipitous, because I actually saw while I was living in Toronto, a family that was privately sponsored, a Syrian family that came from Syria and was partly stationed in a camp in Lebanon and was brought by the UN under the private refugee sponsorship program into Toronto. And I got to know, because I speak with their children English, this Syrian family, and their lives changed. Their lives changed entirely. So having seen that instance of a the impact of the private refugee sponsorship program so closely myself in my own life, I would say that the private refugee sponsorship program is a successful one, is a good one. There were 5 Toronto professionals, 5 or 4 Toronto professionals who came together, and with some support from the government, they brought in their own money and their own infrastructure to support this family for a year. And that is a tremendous task that they pulled off. I knew some of these people who did this, who supported this family. That's a tremendous feat that they pulled. Although the popular opinion may be that this program is not a good one, Canada should spend its resources bringing up the standard of living of its own indigenous population. All of that is true. Canada should spend its resources bringing up the standard of living of indigenous populations, and indigenous populations, especially those who live in reservations, are in a particularly difficult position in terms of poverty, in terms of education, in terms of other things, and it is Canada's duty to do what it can for its own indigenous population. But accepting refugee and not returning vulnerable populations is a global international legal commitment. It is an international legal commitment. It's called non-refoulement. You cannot return a person who comes to you with seeking asylum. So people who are coming, not economic migrants, people who are coming from war zones, people who are coming from places where there is war and there is political turbulence. Those people who are extremely vulnerable, you cannot. The international legal commitment says that you cannot turn them away. These are not. So I'm making a difference. I'm making a distinction here distinctly between economic migrants, people who migrate from one country to another for a better job. You can stop them. You don't need to accept them all the time. But people who are refugees, people who are coming from war zones, who are particularly in need of support and protection, you have to accept them. And Canada is a large and economically advanced country. It is in the position to accept both various kinds of refugees, especially under the government support program and the private support program, and simultaneously do well for its indigenous population. The two are not mutually exclusive. I don't think in order to help indigenous populations, Canada has to go back on its commitment to the refugee program. I think both can be done at the same time.
All right. Thank you very much. I think the distinction between the kinds of migrants really sheds a lot of light on this issue. And I would love to have continued my set of questions further. But since we are short on time, I will be moving on to audience questions. The audience members have drafted their questions for Mr. Shetty and Dr. Majumdar. So to begin with Mr. Shetty, the first audience question that we have is, how can we ensure a zero emission future and acceleration of decarbonization of the freight industry? How and how soon can we expect this to be achieved?
Yeah, the biggest polluter in the logistic industry obviously are the ships, the aeroplanes, and the trucks, right? And all these 3 industries have announced an ambitious plan to adopt renewable energy. I think more and more they will move towards hydrogen powered ships in the future. Some companies have already committed that the future ships that they will build on clean energy. And I think that same applies to the airplanes. But airplane is probably do not have the technological research for fast engines. Those technologies can be used other than the solar probably, right? So we hear a little bit on solar, but on the shipping industry, clearly there are plans about hydrogen. But I think that technology is also evolving. It is not, and also that may need significant amount of investment, which is also something the shipping industry have to lobby with the government to give the financial support if it is not viable compared to the fossil fuel ships what we run these days. So there is a strong commitment nevertheless, and most of the public companies are adopting what we call as ESG, environment, sustainability, and governance, right? So that framework is now becoming more and more popular, and that is being discussed a lot in the boardrooms to adopt ESG standards. So companies who are ESG compliant are the ones who get the favor of the investors to invest in their companies. So value creation is possible only if you are a ESG compliant organization. So for the trucks, I think the battery technology is being spoken about a lot, and the biofuel burning to reduce the emission is also being spoken about a lot. I think next 3 to 5 years, there will be a big change in the fuel consumption, using more clean energy. And obviously the digitalization and unnecessary running around of the trucks or the people around, optimization of your network, etc., will also bring in a lot of discipline in consolidating the entire movement of the shipments. Is also something that is being actively pursued. So that's I think how I see it. Yeah.
Oh, excellent, sir. It's great to know we're all slowly moving towards a greener form of energy.
Yes.
Our next audience question is for Dr. Majumdar. Dr. Majumdar, Otto Warmbier, an American citizen and a tourist to North America, the Democratic People's Republic of North America, DPRK, was convicted of attempting to steal a propaganda poster from his hotel, for which he was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment with hard labor and many allegations of Warmbier being used as a political tool. Shortly after his sentencing in March 2016, Warmbier suffered a severe neurological injury from an unconfirmed cause and fell into a coma, which has lasted over a year. In light of this incident and the fact that the tourist money is being spent in establishing institutions which commit repulsive human rights violations, should countries allow their citizens to visit such nations? Dr. Majumdar, this is in respect to North Korea.
Right, I understand. So North Korea is like this dark zone in the world, right? Like we don't know much about North Korea, and because of their media blackouts and stuff like that, that even if we know a little bit more about other authoritarian countries, North Korea is not the only authoritarian country in the world. We know very little about North Korea. And I'm troubled to know of this incident. I didn't know of it, this incident that you're describing of this tourist who was in prison and thereafter suffered a neurological injury. It's not for North Korea per se will not accept a lot of tourists, I think, given the pattern of its government. Whether it's for other governments to determine whether or not their citizens want to go to North Korea, I think it's not the government's call. I really think that it's the citizens, enough is known in the media about North Korea, so citizens can make an informed choice about whether or not it is expedient for them to visit North Korea. I don't think it's for the governments to say whether they should curtail their citizens' freedom of movement and allow them or disallow them to visit this or that country. I don't think it's for the governments to say.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think that gives us and the entire audience and the member who asked the question a great clarity of thought. The next audience question is directed to Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty. So what role does governance play as far as the logistics sector is concerned? And what can the government do to improve its intermediation and regulation to boost this sector?
In the logistic industry, the government plays a role of a catalyst. Okay, catalyst to build infrastructure in the private sector, invest in infrastructure which the government need to develop, like roads, bridges, ports, etc. Of course, they can encourage private enterprises to build infrastructure as well. Like we have seen, some of the world-class airports and seaports have been developed by the private sector. So they have become more catalyst, and also in terms of bringing policies on export on import policies, which obviously is a service provider for the export and import merchandise products which move in the ships. And lastly, I think the entire facilitation of regulatory framework in terms of putting the processes in place for GST or custom duty and any other stamp duties. So multiple taxation applies in the logistic industry. And land policies, for example, to building warehouses and logistic parks. So these are the areas where government plays the role of creating policies and becoming a catalyst to help the industry to do their job as per the international standards.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for telling us the role of government and simplifying it for all of us. This discussion has truly been enriching, insightful, and inspiring all in one. But on account of time constraints, we will now move on to concluding remarks. Dr. Majumdar, anything you would like to tell the young audience seated here?
Sure. As I tell my students constantly in class, the youth of today are, they're the harbingers of our future, and they're going to correct all the mistakes we have made. We've made many mistakes over the, professionally, politically, economically, many mistakes over the past 20 or 30 years, and it's the new generation who we expect will correct our mistakes. I will only say one thing, that there is no substitute for concentrating on learning. Often people who are in university and colleges think that they can short circuit, they can shortcut the learning process. The process of learning is a hard and often boring, often lonely, and often long one. It's not always the most pleasurable and the most entertaining one, but there's no substitute for that. You can do whatever else you can, on social media or whatever else, that you want to do, that is entertaining and that will occupy your mind for some time and give you some entertainment. And at this time, if you substitute your learning process for other things, you'll probably regret it later. So for a lot of my young friends who are constantly hooked to social media and the internet and other things, I will only say that don't waste very, very precious time.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. I'm sure our audience members are noting it all down. I am, at least. Dr. Shetty, is there anything that you would like to tell our young audience?
Yes, sure. I think I can speak for an hour on this subject of giving advice. To add to what Dr. Majumdar said, learning and listening, right? I think these are two very important qualities. We have to take it all the way to our grave. Okay, never stop learning and never stop listening. Listening and listening and process and internalize, right? The second most important thing is leverage. Life is always about leveraging, right? Leveraging your skill, leveraging your knowledge, leveraging your energy for the right purpose, which is most important, right? End of the day, many of us, end up with a job or with a business, and then mostly we only think about making money and think that money will bring us happiness. Yes, money does bring happiness, but money doesn't bring you ultimate happiness. So I think, feeling proud about what you do and be a person, help in making an impact to the society, helping the ones who are underprivileged, and work for nation building and become a global citizen, right? I think that is the advice I would give. That encompasses a lot of things. I'm just putting all that into one bullet to say that think about somebody who make yourself proud, make your family proud, and make a difference to the world at large, not just to yourself and to your immediate family. Look at a larger picture, stretch yourself, beyond yourself and your family. Always try to stretch.
Right.
And you will get tremendous happiness by that. Giving is one of the most important, most precious and most rewarding, enriching experience. So learn to give time, money, love, whatever that you can share.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. We would have loved to have this conversation for longer, but sadly, the session will now soon come to an end. And as Mr. Shetty rightly mentioned, giving is the most important. So once again, a thank you to Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty and Dr. Atreyee Majumdar for giving us their valuable time. I'm sure every audience member is getting up here more educated and informed. That would be all from me. I will now hand it over to Avik Chokhani, who will propose the vote of thanks on behalf of us all.
I would like to take this opportunity to record a heartfelt thanks to our speakers, Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty and Dr. Atreyee Majumdar, who took time out of their busy schedule to help us explore the idea of freedom further. Further, I would also like to thank our wonderful audience members for attending and sending in their questions, which facilitated our discussion and assisted our understanding. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you,
Bye.
ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you
so
sir.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you, ma'am.